Hey guys, so in this video we are going to go over animal organization. It is basically a boiled down anatomy and physiology, basics of anatomy and physiology class, just in miniature, a really short video. So we're going to cover really basic topics in regards to animal organization. And so the first part we have already discussed. We talked about levels of organization, all from the teeny tiny stuff where we said this was the chemical level, right? And we said that nothing was alive at the chemical level. Atoms, molecules of glucose and lipids and that kind of stuff, that's not alive. It's the chemical level of organization, but it's not alive. Organelles like nucleus or mitochondria, those kind of things, those aren't alive either. Back in the day, they probably were, at least mitochondria and chloroplasts were, but that's a story for another time. But on their own, right now, you cannot pull out a mitochondria and expect it to live and go on with itself. It can't. So organelles are not alive. Cells, we said again, well, where it's at, but they have all the properties of life, that they can grow, they can reproduce, they can sense their environment, they have motility, a whole bunch of things that involve properties of life, and they do all those things at the cellular level. So this is the smallest level of life, cellular level. Then we take a bunch of cells and we can make up a tissue type. So tissues are going to be a level up. So different types of cells are going to make a tissue. That could be epithelium tissue, connective tissue, nervous tissue, muscle tissue, whatever it is. Tissue are bunches of cells put together. Then we're going to take that tissue and we are going to make an organ. Excuse me. So teaching AP2 this semester, and we talk about the heart this week and last week. So we talk about the heart, and the heart has 3 layers. It's going to have an inner layer of epithelial tissue that lines the inside of the heart. It's the same stuff that lines the inside of your blood vessels. So we're going to have some simple squamous cells right there. And then we're going to have heart muscle. And the muscle inside the heart is its own type of muscle tissue, and that's myocardium. It's its own, literally its own special type of muscle is cardiac muscle. And then they're going to have a little coat of layers on the outside of the heart. We're going to have epicardium there. So there's 3 basic layers, 3 different tissue types in a heart to make one organ. So we're going to go up from tissue to organ. And then if I put the heart together with the vasculature, the arteries and veins and all the capillaries, and then I put that combined with blood, which is a connective tissue type, and I put it all together, I have the cardiovascular system, which is an organ system. And then if I put all the organ systems together, cardiovascular system, repro system, respiratory system, what else? Digestive system, nervous system, all those things, I can make my complex multicellular organism that I am, because I need all those organ systems to make me, myself, and I, which is an organism. If there were lots of humans in an area, then that is a population. And then population that is going to interact with its environment is going to be community like the people and the plants outside, the trees outside, and the birds that live in the trees, and the bugs that live in the grass that are below the trees. All of that would be a community. And then ecosystem, the light that hits the trees, and the carbon cycle and the energy that's going through in this cycle, going through the inorganic and the organic stuff, ecosystem, and then biosphere. So one more time, we know our levels. You're going to know those levels forwards and backwards, because you're definitely going to see those on the test. Levels of organization. So as we talk specifically about anatomy and physiology, we know levels, that we have the chemical, then the cell, then lots of cells make a tissue, then those tissues can make an organ, the organ can make the organ system, and then all the systems put together is an organism. Another thing that we need to know is body plans, symmetry. Is this organism symmetrical? That is always a question that we categorize things as. Going forward, we will classify things. What kind of symmetry does it have? So it has no symmetry. If you see this prefix A in front of something, it usually means it's without. It's missing whatever that is. And in this case, we're talking about symmetry. So asymmetry means no symmetry, means without symmetry. So sponges, like in this picture here, they grow wherever. They bud off, and there's new baby sponges over here, and they are asymmetrical. Another type of symmetry is radial. So we have this picture here of a sea anemone, and these guys are kind of circular. They are radial, meaning that you could cut them like a pizza. Like when you're making your pizza slices, no matter where you slice that pizza, you're still going to get equal amounts on either side, right? So you could slice it this way, you could slice it this way, I could slice it like this on the diagonal, and either way, I'm still getting half and half. They're going to be symmetrical on either side, no matter where I slice it, like a pizza pie, as long as I'm going through the middle. That's radial symmetry. So circular, radial tires, whatever you need to remember that these are circular type of symmetry. And then bilateral is me, you. We have bilateral symmetry. So top to bottom, the only way you could slice us to have one side look like the other side is right smack in the middle, right? So the left side would look like the right side. We have bilateral symmetry, and there will be lots of animals with bilateral symmetry too. So those are our symmetrical body plan categories. No symmetry is asymmetrical. Radial is a circle, and bilateral is me and you, where you'd slice it, one direction to get those left and rights, and you can only do it one way to get equal portions on both sides of your slice. You can check out another animation about that here, about that basic concept. We have this tree here. This tree image is really helpful in regards to learning these traits. So before we had apps that you could just throw up a picture and say, what is this? And the app will tell you. We had keys, and it would ask you a question. Does it have this? Yes, you go this way. No, you go this way. And then you just follow the tree. And it's a branching series of questions. Does it have this? Yes, no. Yes, no. And eventually you're going to get to the answer of an identification of what you're looking for. So that's kind of like how this tree is, kind of like how we did our labs in evolution with our animalcules. Does it have big spots or little spots? Does it have no spots? Long body, short antenna, big antenna, lots of toes, no toes, whatever the questions are that you can categorize your stuff. So here's a phylogenetic tree where we're categorizing and asking questions. The first one, symmetry. Does it have symmetry or not? And so non-symmetrical or asymmetrical are sponges. So sponges, your bath sponges, all those different types of sponges, and there are lots of different ones out there in lots of different shapes, but in general, sponges, asymmetrical. And then, okay, so no means we're over here with sponges. Yes, it's going to be everybody over here. Then, does it have tissues? Yes or no? Does it have true tissues or not true tissues? Does it have tissues? Yes. Does it have radial symmetry or bilateral symmetry? So again, radial symmetry was like a pizza pie. You slice it all different ways, and you always get equal halves no matter where you slice it. So these are cnidarians, or radial symmetry. Your jellyfish, your anemones, the picture that we just saw. And then bilateral, just like me and you sliced this right down top to bottom, is going to be this category over here. Then we'll talk about protostome and deuterostome later on in a couple slides from now. But this is a tree that's got some pretty basic questions, and it may help if you start to memorize this now, at least the very beginnings about the different symmetries and who has no symmetry, bilateral, radial symmetry in the different groups, because you will have questions that are comparing groups. You'll have specific questions about, say, sponges, and we'll have like 4 or 5 questions about sponges, but we will also have groups, questions on a test that may compare groups. Like everyone in this category has bilateral symmetry, but, and I don't know, I put anemone, and that would be the answer. Everybody has bilateral symmetry except this one. Something like that, where you have multiple groups and you need to categorize and compare them amongst themselves about a specific trait. And in this case, this tree breaks it up as symmetry, so it's kind of helpful to know. All right, so I'm gonna move on to terms. Anatomical terms, we have them in your outline that you need to know. This is straight up, I stole this from my A&P chapter where it's talking about anatomical positions and directions. You can take the little quiz if you would like to learn more like my AP students need to, but I just want you to cover these basic terms. So in medical, in medicine, in science, we have terms for things, and sometimes we have 2 and 3 terms for the exact same thing. So you may see the term anterior, and it can reference the entire front of something, while posterior could reference the back side of something. When we're talking about animals, oftentimes you'll hear ventral. When I hear ventral, I think belly, guts, kind of tummy-like area, their ventral side, as opposed to the dorsal side, totally makes me think of dolphins and their dorsal fin back there. So dorsal and posterior to me kind of go hand in hand, and anterior and ventral to me go hand in hand if we're talking about a person. There are other terms too. Cranial, your cranium is this right here. These bones right here that house your brain, this stuff is your cranium. So that's, if you hear cranial, it's heading towards the head, going towards the head where that area of your body is. Cranial. Caudal, think tail. That's where your tail is going to be, where your tailbone is. So on animals, where's the head? Cranial. Where's the tail at is going to be caudal. Another one, medial starts with M. It means middle. Medial is middle. So if we were asking where the belly button is in relation to my, I don't know, my hip bone, then we would say the belly button is more medial to the hip bone. The hip bone is on the outer side of my body, so I would say that's more lateral. So if we're going from inside to outside, if I was a surgeon making a cut, and I cut at my belly button and started slicing outside, I would cut in the medial aspect and head laterally towards the outside, towards the outer edges, towards my obliques, on my abdominals, on the edges, those outside abdominals. Lateral, heading towards the outside. Medial is right smack in the middle. Medial, lateral is heading towards the edges. Laterals, medials, and we use that term over and over in AP1 all the time. Another term that we do talk about is going to be proximal and distal. With proximal, that's going to be, it's the terminology in your textbook says near the midline, and distal would be further from the midline. Proximal is going to be closest to the point of attachment, really, and distal is furthest from the point of attachment. So if I was talking about, you can get my whole arm in here, but fingertips are about as distal as they get, because my elbow and my shoulder are going to be closer to the point of attachment. So if I was comparing fingertips and elbow, my fingertips are more distal and my elbow is more proximal to the point of attachment where it's located. So anywhere you're following a point of attachment, whether that's an arm, a leg, a tail, some vasculature to where it originates from, but if you're going towards where it comes from, it's going to be proximal. And if you're going away from that, further out, it's more distal. Distal is further out. Distal, proximal, and then superior top, inferior is going to be below. If we were making, again, back to the surgery, if some patient, like a C-section, was sliced open on the table and we were discussing organs, and you were comparing, if it's a C-section, the uterus and maybe the skin. The skin is going to be above the organ that's below it, right? So that's superior. The skin is superior to the uterus, which is way below, the musculature and the abdominal wall, and below that is going to be inferior. So superior top, inferior bottom. It can literally mean like the top where the head is, or it can just mean like more superficial than something else. So I think that covers all of our directional terms and anatomical terms. Let's move on to reproduction. So with reproduction, there can be two types, basically. You're going to have asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction, there's lots of animals and they can do it in lots of different ways, which is really cool that is a possibility. So we have fragmentation, that's this guy. So remember we said sponges were asymmetrical. They didn't grow in a specific pattern. They're budding and pieces of them are falling off and making new ones. That's fragmentation is happening here in this picture, where a piece will fall off and then it will grow into an entirely new organism based on those cells that came chunking off on that piece, on that fragment. So that's fragmentation here with sponges. This is a beautiful group of sponges, and we started with like one, and then these little baby sponges just kind of merge off, and then they'll grow into adults. And then this one, when you have another bud that grows off over here, they all have the same genetic information. When we're talking about asexual reproduction, it's all the same genes. So everybody here has the same genetic information. Same with parthenogenesis. There we go. I said it today. With parthenogenesis, we are going to develop an adult organism from an unfertilized egg. So that happens in bees, where we talk about the worker bees, the drones. Those aren't fertilized eggs that they develop. If anybody knows what this guy is, super cool organism, the Komodo dragon, she can lay eggs that aren't fertilized and they will develop into a fully functional adult despite not having fertilized eggs. So these are all different types of asexual reproduction, where you don't need a partner. There's no mixing of genes going on. That's asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction is going to have a different organism come along and the genes will mix. And so that offspring is going to have more diverse genes than the parent did. It's not going to be the same exact genes passing on from parent to offspring. These are different. This is genetic variation. This is the key to why something would want to be and use sexual reproduction, because you have mixing of the genes, genetic diversity, where asexual is not. But different types, fragmentation, budding like this sponge right here, and parthenogenesis like the Komodo dragon or the honeybee. All of these things are different versions of asexual reproduction. Here is another picture again of the bees and the Komodo dragon for parthenogenesis. Sexual reproduction is going to use two gametes that will come together, whether it is a sperm and an egg. If we were talking about plants, which we don't because it's zoology, but if we were talking about plants, we'd have an egg and the sperm trapped in the pollen grain. The pollen grain has to get there, and then eventually it's going to get out of there, form a little tube, and the sperm cells will meet up with the egg cells from the plant. But if you are using two different organisms and they will fuse together and merge their genes, that is, sorry, the dog is whining in the background. That is going to be sexual reproduction. And when they merge, the egg and the sperm are going to merge together. They form this one cell that forms everything. The zygote is the totipotent stem cell. It forms every other stem cell. Everything that you are came from this one cell, the zygote. And that came from a sperm and an egg. And they fused their nuclei together. And that cell went and underwent cleavage, and it went from one cell to two cells, and two cells to four cells, and four cells to eight cells, and on and on and on. So here is our totipotent stem cell, the zygote, the cell that makes everything. All the different other stem cells come from that one. And every time it divides, it's going to undergo cleavage. Cleavage is when it splits. And it will go again and again and again from 2 to 4 to 8 to 16, on until instead of a morula, we're going to form a blastula, which is this hollow ball of hundreds of cells now. And depending on where those cells are in the grand scheme of things, when it starts to undergo this splitting and this cleavage, you know, maybe this portion of the cells over here are going to form one germ layer, and this portion over here is going to form another germ layer, and this stuff down here in this section is a third germ layer. So when we talk about germ layers forming, it's going to be based on these cells and what structures these are going to form. So we have this blastula. It's a couple hundred cells, and now they have formed a hollow ball of an organism. And that hollow ball starts to fold in on itself, starts to invaginate, and that is going to be where we start to form our germ layers at this step, at this stage. So this is happening, if we're talking about people, this can happen, cleavage happens, what, like 36 hours, I want to say, after intercourse. Fertilization happens, cleavage happens, and then it starts immediately after the sperm and the egg have come together and it starts to split. It's looking like this in days. It looks like this. It's gone to hundreds of cells, and it has this hollow ball, and then it's going to infold in, invaginate in, and it's going to have gastrulation. And this is where our germ layers come from. What am I talking about when I'm talking about germ layers? So germ layers are going to be these layers. There is going to be an ecto. Ecto is on the outside. An endo is on the inside. And a meso. Meso, again, if you see M and an ME, kind of anything, medial, meso, it's going to be in the middle. It's in the middle. So on these three germ layers, they are going to form the organs and the tissues that are involved in these germ layers. What's on the inside of your body, what's on the outside of your body, and what's going to go in the middle, in between. All of that is formed by these three germ layers. So does every organism have three germ layers like we do? No, not everything does. So some of these things only have 2 out of the 3 germ layers, and they are going to be diploblasts. Diploblasts, we can see these guys have an endoderm right here. Here is their endoderm, that stuff that's on the inside. So for us, like our GI tract, because we're basically a giant donut, that is our endoderm. That's going to be all of our GI tract, accessory organs involved in digestion. That's their endoderm. Jellyfish are going to have, anemones, corals are going to have an endoderm. They are also going to have a second germ layer, the outside layer. They're going to have an ectoderm here. So here's their ectoderm, and they have an endoderm. They have 2 germ layers, therefore it is diploblast for these guys. Then the other more advanced things are going to have, excuse me, they're going to be triploblasts, and they will have all 3. They will have an endo right here. They will have a meso in between, and an ecto on the outside. Endo, meso, ecto on the outside. These have all 3 germ layers. So flatworms have them, other animals, sharks, us for sure, have 3 germ layers. So here again is that, does it have symmetry? No symmetry, sponges. Does it have tissue layers? Is it a diploblast or a triploblast? We said cnidarians are going to be diploblasts, that they only have the 2 germ layers. They also have radial symmetry. Does it have bilateral symmetry, where it's sliced down the middle? And then protostome and deuterostome. So remember when we saw that gastrulation was happening, and we're invaginating in right here, and that is going to For some organisms that have a complete digestive cavity, like we do, we have an in and then there's an out down below, right? We have a one-way track. What we swallow in goes in, and it normally shouldn't come back out unless we have some problems. So we have a one-way gut is what we call it. There are some organisms that have a two-way gut. So like jellyfish, what they swallow in, they will digest, pull out what they want out of it, and then it comes back out the same way. So it depends. Do they have a mouth and an anus, and what developed first? That's the difference with protostomes and deuterostomes. So if the mouth developed first, you are protostome. Mouth first. Well, what category are we in? We are in chordates. So we are a deuterostome, which means our mouth did not develop first. It developed second. Our mouth developed second. We are deuterostomes. Tissues and the different tissue types. Getting ahead of myself. Here are the different tables of all the different tissues that will come about from ecto. Again, ecto is outside, so it's going to include your skin, some of your nervous system, on ecto. So I think hair, skin, nails, all this stuff that's on the outside of our body, right? That's ecto, and it also includes your central nervous system and your peripheral nervous system. That's ectoderm. Mesoderm, gonna be in the middle. I'm gonna jump to what's on the inside, so then you can just tell literally what's in the middle. So hair, skin, nails, nervous system is ectoderm. Inside is going to be digestive system, like I keep telling us. The GI tract going down through your body, you know, swallowing it down, stomach, intestines on the way out of your body. That's your digestive system. It's going to also include accessory organs for those guys. It's going to include some of the respiratory, some of the urinary, some of the repro. That's endo, inside, endoderm. And then the meso is going to be everything in between. What's in between my GI tract and my skin on the outside of my body? That's going to include the other stuff. Bones, muscles, cardiovascular system, lymphatic system. That's meso, the stuff in the middle. So when we talk about germ layers, those are the three things that I want you to know. Ecto on the outside, endo on the inside, and then meso is going to be the stuff smushed in between those structures. Here is that protostome and deuterostome. Is it a one-way gut, or is it a two-way gut where what comes in must come back out? For our two-way gut systems, here is our picture of the jellyfish and anemone. And some of these guys are bound on the ground and they don't really move around a whole bunch like our sea anemones. Sometimes these guys will switch around and find a place that works better for them. But on the whole, these guys are on the bottom of the reef, while the jellyfish medusas are floating around up top of the water column and catching stuff. But both of these, no matter which body type they are, medusa or polyp, they have a two-way gut system. What comes in still gets digested, broken down, and the waste products left over go back out. Two-way gut system. Some things, here is our picture of our protostomes and deuterostomes. Protostomes, remember, mouth first. Mouth first for protostomes. Arthropods, insects, are protostomes. Annelids are segmented worms, and mollusks are all protostomes. Deuterostomes are really only two groups on our tree that I told y'all was pretty helpful when we're talking about memorizing categories about stuff. Under deuterostomes, where mouth is second, it's going to include us. We are chordates, us, sharks, everything with, you know, the spinal column and the 5 things that make it a chordate, which we'll talk about later in the semester. And then echinoderms. Echinoderms are the closest relative to chordates. They are also deuterostomes on that phylogenetic tree. So there's only 2 groups for deuterostomes. Protostomes are going to include other groups. Here it is again. Bilateral. Is it a protostome or is it a deuterostome? The only deuterostomes are us. That's us, chordates, and echinoderms, sea stars, that kind of stuff. Everything else is a protostome. Everything else is a protostome. And that's going to include all of these guys that we are going to talk about specifically later on in the semester. Types of tissues. Now I'm finally where I'm at in the PowerPoint. Different tissue types. The dogs have been let out of the crate. The 4 different types of tissues. There are 4 categories where we're going to put stuff. One of the easiest is nervous. Nervous is nervous. What's the job of the nervous system? It is to communicate messages, to, input things that are coming in from the body, that I can see light coming in, and I'm going to interpret that light and decide what I'm going to do about it, and then maybe I'll, close my eyes or whatever if I don't want to stare at that light. Whatever that is, we are communicating messages. I can, touch my computer and I can feel that it is a smooth, cold surface. That is all input that's coming in, and I'm interpreting it and going to deal with it. Nervous system. Muscle tissue is exactly what it sounds like. So normally when we think of muscle tissue, we think of skeletal muscle tissue. That's the stuff that, is attached to our bones and moves us all around. Skeletal muscle tissue, but there is also cardiac muscle tissue. The stuff I told you was specific to the heart. And there is smooth muscle tissue. We're going to find smooth muscle tissue on blood vessels, arteries, and veins, where we talk about things that will vasoconstrict and vasodilate, where we want to bring more blood flow or less blood flow to an area. We use them on blood vessels. You're also going to see them on the GI tract, because even if you were standing on your head and decided to eat a bite of food and swallow it down, it's still going to push that food. You're still going to be able to swallow that food down, and that's thanks to the smooth muscle that lines your GI tract. So there's cardiac, there is smooth, and there is skeletal muscle, and this is all another type of tissue, which is just the muscle category. So we covered nervous. Muscle tissue is tissue number 2 category. Then we have epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue is classified based on shape and layers. And so these guys are going to cover exposed surfaces of things, whether that is the skin on your body that is exposed to the outside, or the lining of my mouth, because even though I can close my mouth, it's still exposed. My entire GI tract is still going to be exposed if I swallow stuff down. The lining of my intestines, that hole inside of your intestines called the lumen, that's exposed to stuff. So anytime you have a hollow organ, something like your intestines or inside of the heart, all of that has a liner, and that liner is epithelial tissue. They are going to cover all exposed surfaces. Then underneath that is going to be connective tissue. Connective tissue to me is totally a junk drawer category. If epi is going to be category 3, connective tissue is really everything else. It is going to include bone, it is going to include blood, it's going to include fat. It's a whole bunch of different things that you wouldn't think go together, and they all kind of get lumped into this junk category of connective tissue. The one thing that we can say about connective tissue, though, it's never exposed. You're not going to have exposed fat. That should never be exposed. Same for blood. You will have some sort of layer that protects that, and that layer is going to be epithelial. So epi is always on top of, covering the surface, and then underneath that will be your connective. But you shouldn't have connective tissue exposed at all. So when we talk about these things, we got epithelial tissue, we have the glands like sweat glands, or my face is kind of oily right now, and that is a different type of gland in your skin called sebaceous. Sebaceous gland is what makes your skin oily. So those are different glands. Sebaceous glands, mammary glands are a different type of sweat gland in there. And we have exocrine glands and endocrine glands, and I'm not going to stress y'all out about knowing those because that's more anatomy, physiology, and we'll get specialized later. But epi, let's talk about epi. Characteristics of these guys, they have a top and a bottom. So they are polar because they have a top and a bottom of those types of cells. They're going to have a bottom basement membrane, it's basal lamina. They kind of all work together as a protective covering. They don't have blood vessels running through them. So again, we see that A in front of something, again, that prefix A. Asymmetry is what we talked about before when it didn't have symmetry. Now it's avascular because this stuff doesn't have blood flow running through them. Epithelium is avascular. They're going to have lots of nerves because, again, these are the protectors, and we need to find out what's going on that surface, whether that surface is the surface of the skin or maybe it's on the inside of the heart. Oh, but we got to figure out what's going on there. So we're going to have lots of nerves on that surface to determine and take in information that way. And then because we said these are protective surfaces, they need to grow back quickly. So rapid generation. Your skin is turning over at least every month. The outside topmost layer will turn over about roughly every 2 weeks, give or take, depending on your age. When you're younger, it turns over faster. When you're older, you hold on to it a little bit more and it's slower cell turnover. But it does turn over. Your whole skin will turn over as far as the epithelial layer on top. So that's why if anybody has tattoos and ink, that ink needs to go down in the dermis, which is the connective layer below epithelial layer, and that stays. That's permanent because that layer gets sloughed off. And then you would have paid all this money for a tattoo and only have it for a couple weeks, and that would stink. So when we talk about epi, we have to classify them based on shape and layers. So when we're talking about shape, we are going to have squamous. And to me, squamous looks like a pancake. It's flat, it's gonna have a nucleus. It looks like a pancake or maybe an egg, a fried egg. Before you scramble it, I like to scramble mine. But if you just put it in the pan, crack it and put it in the pan, that's kind of what squamous looks like. They're very thin, they're very flat. They're great for being a very thin layer to have diffusion, osmosis going through this stuff so we can transport things back across the surfaces of things like this. Squamous are flat. Cubes, cuboidal, are going to sound exactly like it is. It is about as wide as it is tall. Is it perfectly square? No, it totally is not. But it's roughly as wide as it is tall, roughly cube shaped. And then we have columnar. And columnar is column shaped. So they will be wide, but they will be much taller than they are wide. So width and height and width and height. That's basics. Is it a squamous shape? Is it a cuboidal shape? Is it a columnar shape? What's the shape of your epithelium? And then how many layers are there? Is it just one layer? If there is just one layer of something, it is called simple. And if there are multiple layers of something, it's called stratified. Stratified. So let's look at some examples. Simple squamous, and remember squamous was this thin stuff, really thin nucleus right there. If it's simple, it's a whole bunch of these guys. This is all simple squamous. Where do we find simple squamous? We're going to find these guys in the lungs. What do the lungs do? They exchange gas for us. Every time we breathe in, we're taking in oxygen from the air around us. We're getting rid of the CO2 that's accumulated inside of our bodies and has been transported to the lungs by our bloodstream. And then that CO2 can get exhaled out and the oxygen gets brought in. So we are transferring gases across this very thin surface of simple squamous cells. And it's a type of epithelium. So that's one place of many that we have simple squamous. Very, very thin, like millimeters super small, thin layer of cells versus stratified. Stratified are lots of layers, lots of layers. So one of my favorites that you can see for stratified squamous is going to be on your tongue. Here we're going to have, no, go back. Here we're going to have stratified squamous epi, and you can see all of this. This is all the stratified squamous epithelium. This is all your epidermis. That's what it looks like on the tongue, and it looks like on the skin here. On the skin, it's a little different than your tongue. They're both the same type of cell, but on your skin is, it's not waterproof, right? Because you can totally get into your bathtub and you start to absorb that water. So it's not waterproof, but it's water resistant. And the substance that makes it water resistant is keratin. It's the same stuff that your hair is made out of, that your nails are made out of. Keratin helps make your cells water resistant. So you want that on your skin because you don't want everything outside being able to sink into your cells. You don't want that because then bad guys can get in. So you use that as protection. So your skin is keratinized, but you don't want that for your tongue. You want to be able to taste your food and sense what you are putting in your body. So those are non-keratinized, but both of these things are exposed to abrasion all the time. Rubbing my face, washing my face every night and every morning, and using that face cloth is going to abrade the surface of my skin. I need to protect it in case, I'm riding down the road in my bike or I'm jogging or whatever and I fall down and I hurt myself. I want multiple layers of protection on my skin. So those are stratified squamous. We need protection. Same with the mouth. I was just eating, it's a busy day today for me. So I ate a microwave dinner, a microwave lunch. It was really good, by the way. So I microwaved this thing and I ate a bite of it right out of the microwave and it burned my tongue. So I wanted multiple layers on my tongue, right? If we just have one layer there, that'd be really bad. So you want lots of layers. This is stratified squamous epi here. So they're the same cell. It just depends on, is it one layer or is it multiple layers? Multiple layers of squamous shaped epi. We might have one layer, simple, and that layer of cells may be as wide as they are tall, cuboidal shaped epi. And we can find these guys in our PCT and our DCT in the tubules of your kidneys. So after I eat my food and all of that nutrition gets broken down, my GI tract is going to go into the bloodstream, and then my cells are going to take that up, and we want to absorb that stuff. And then the bloodstream is going to go through the kidneys, and the kidneys are going to filter all of it. The kidneys filter all your blood, and it decides what's going to be reabsorbed and what's going to go out as filtrate, which then is going to be your urine. So we need to figure out, what are we going to keep and absorb and what are we not? Well, we're doing this in the PCT and the DCT, where we are doing reabsorption and filtration. That is happening here. So these, again, they're not perfectly square, but they're roughly about as wide as they are tall. Simple cuboidals. Simple columnars, GI tract. When we are breaking down the food and absorbing all of the nutrients, all of the delicious goodness from your food, you want to absorb those. So these guys are simple columnars. They are only one layer thick, just like our simple cuboidals, but they are taller than they are wide, much taller than they are wide. Simple columnars. GI tract is where you're going to find these guys. Transitional is a different type of epi. It's cool because its main claim to fame is it stretches. These are stretchy. You're going to find them in areas that get stretched out. The bladder. You can drink a lot of water and hold that stuff in for a while before you really, really have to go. It stretches, it increases in size. And so do the ureters. leading down to those, and the uterus, if you are a female, stretches. These are transitional epi, they stretch. Moving on to past our layers, epi was our protective surface coating of cells. Underneath those are going to be our connective. Remember I said it was a catch-all category. There are lots of different things in here. These guys can, if we're talking about the skeletal system, it's going to give us a structural framework. If we're talking about blood, it's going to be transporting fluids and other materials, waste, nutrients. If we're talking about bones, again, they are there to protect delicate organs, like your cranium is protecting your brain. Your rib cage is protecting your heart and other vital organs, your lungs in there. If we're talking about storing energy, your fat stores energy. It's your long-term energy storage is your fat. And defending the body from microorganisms, that's your white blood cells, which are floating around in the blood, that liquid connective tissue. So these guys are underneath the epi. They're a separate tissue type. Nervous, muscle, epi, connective are our 4 tissue types. Connective is going to be underneath epithelial, and it's a catch-all category. It includes lots of different stuff like your long-term energy storage, which is fat, also called adipose. So these are fat cells. These are adipocytes. They look really similar to the slide of the lungs, but it's not the lungs. Your ligaments and your tendons are really strong in one direction. So this dense regular is a type of connective tissue type that helps attach your muscles to your bones with your tendons, or bone to bone with your ligaments. And this is dense regular, and it is a type of connective tissue. Dense irregular is another type of connective tissue. We're going to find this on our skin, so I can push my skin, in a circle in lots of different directions and make a whole bunch of really ridiculous faces. And while I'm making my really ridiculous faces, I can pull my fingers away and the skin goes back to where it should be. This is dense irregular, and it's because the connective fibers are running all over the place. What makes ligaments and tendons very strong is the fact that these guys run in the same direction. I mean, all of this stuff is going in one direction, and it's very, very strong in that direction. But anybody who's ever seen anybody be injured, hopefully you've never been the person being injured, but I like soccer. Soccer's kind of my thing. And somebody comes in to go for the soccer ball or football, and they come in to go for the ball, and they get hit in the knee, and it goes the wrong way. You just tore ACL, MCL, whatever, because you're only strong in one direction, where dense irregular is strong in lots of different directions. And I can, push and pull, and everything should still stay where it's at. Dense irregular, it's a type of connective tissue. Bone, your skeleton, that gives you the framework that you have that keeps you upright and not a puddle of mush on the floor, is connective tissue. Cartilage, which are going to be at the ends of your bones, that help you with your joints. There's cartilage in the ends of your nose. There's cartilage on the tips of your ear. There's cartilage in your rib cage. You've got in all sorts of places, and that is another connective tissue type. And I'm not going to make y'all memorize hyaline cartilage, fibrocartilage, elastic cartilage, and all that. That's for an AP1 class. They get to memorize that stuff, but you don't have to worry about it. Blood, again, is a type of connective tissue. Red blood cells transport oxygen on the hemoglobin. They also transport CO2 too. White blood cells defend your body against bad guys, other bacteria out there, viruses out there, trying to take over your cell. Coronavirus is coming in and attack one of your cells. Your white blood cells should be able to mount a defense against those guys, especially if they have seen those guys before, because they memorize them. They have memories. That's why vaccinations work, and why we're trying to get a vaccination for COVID, because these white blood cells are defending your body. Platelets are not entire cells. They are actually pieces of cells, but platelets help you clot, and it's called hemostasis. To keep your blood where it is in your body is hemostasis. Organ systems, all the different organ systems. So major components of these, if you had hair Skin and nails that we were talking about, we're talking about the integumentary system. Skeletal system, bones. Lymphatic system is going to be kind of hand in hand with your circulatory system, where your blood, your arteries, and your veins, and that vasculature is. There's typically a lymphatic system next to it. So fluid gets pushed out of your bloodstream into the tissues surrounding the capillary beds that are all over the place. So fluid gets pushed out, and some of it comes back in, but others of it gets stuck, and we need to drain it away. So when we drain it away, that's your lymphatic system. Your lymphatic system is also going to house a whole bunch of white blood cells to keep you safe and get rid of any baddies that it may find in that fluid. Respiratory system, lungs, going to help you exchange gas. Muscular system is going to help you move around. Skeletal muscles help you move around. Cardiac muscles helps the heartbeat. All that good stuff. Smooth muscle, vasodilation, vasoconstriction, moving your food through the GI tract, that's all smooth muscle. Nervous, we said, was talking, communication of input and output. Your central nervous system, which is your brain and spinal cord, and then all the nerves coming off of that is peripheral nervous system, CNS and PNS. Digestive system, we talked about swallowing down, stomach, intestines, all of that digestive system. Urinary system, your kidneys that I said filter the blood, urinary system, and it's going to send that filtration down the ureters to the bladder to be stored, and then it goes out the urethra. Endocrine is hormones. You have different parts of your body that release chemicals called hormones, and those things travel everywhere, and they have different impacts depending on what the hormone is, like testosterone, estrogen, growth hormone, fight or flight, your epinephrine and norepinephrine, your adrenaline. All of those are hormones, and that they will affect change in your body. That's your endocrine system. Cardiovascular, we talked about heart, blood vessels, blood. And then repro systems, guys' reproductive systems with their penis and testes, women's reproductive systems with our uterus and ovaries and birth canal. Those are the different organ systems in the body in a nutshell. This video was way longer than I wanted it to be. But this is a lot of information. This is like chapters worth of information, anatomy and physiology, kind of boiled down for us to get a basic concept of cells and tissues and germ layers, what you're going to see in the different animal kingdoms as far as symmetry, as far as germ layers. When we start to dissect things, and you will see references to proximal or distal or caudal or anterior or dorsal, you'll know what those terms are. And then when we talk about the different systems, which organism has this one, which organism is missing this system, which organism is not developed enough to have X system, Y system, whatever it is. Now we know what those systems are and what they do. So this is kind of foundational stuff for the rest of the semester when we talk about different organisms. So let me know if you have any questions about animal organization.